For years, people who followed Jonathan McReynolds closely always felt that there was something deeper behind his music. His songs were not just ordinary gospel tracks. They carried emotions that touched the heart in a way that felt very personal and very real. Listeners would often say that when Jonathan sang, it seemed as if he was speaking directly from lived experiences, the kind that were heavy, complicated, and maybe even painful. Fans noticed the little cracks in his voice, the intensity of his lyrics, and the way he always performed with a depth that felt like it was hiding a bigger story. This led many to quietly suspect that Jonathan's journey was not as smooth or perfect as it appeared on the outside. People admired his talent, but they also wondered, what inspired so much passion, so much raw emotion in his music? Was there something in his personal life that he never openly spoke about? These silent questions stayed in the minds of his listeners and even in the gospel industry for a long time. Everyone felt the weight of an unspoken truth, but no one knew exactly what it was. Jonathan's journey into music began at a very young age, and from the start, it was clear that he had something special. His voice carried a purity that could not be taught, and his passion for gospel music quickly set him apart. As he rose in the industry, people often noticed that behind him stood one constant figure, his mother. She was always present, always supportive, yet always quiet. She never stepped into the spotlight, never gave interviews, and never explained much about Jonathan's personal life. This silence, however, made people even more curious. Reporters and fans would often try to dig deeper, asking about Jonathan's upbringing and the struggles he may have faced, but his mother remained reserved. Instead of answering directly, she would simply smile, show her support for her son, and leave the rest unanswered. With time, her silence almost became a mystery of its own. It was as though she carried a truth that she wasn't ready to share with the world. Jonathan, on the other hand, never pushed her to reveal anything either. In his interviews, he would often speak highly of his mother's strength and faith, but never went into details about their past. This unspoken understanding between mother and son made people wonder even more, what was being left unsaid? Why was his mother so careful to avoid certain topics? These unanswered questions only made the suspicions grow stronger in the minds of those who followed his journey closely. Jonathan McReynolds' journey was never an ordinary one. From the moment he chose music as his path, people noticed that he wasn't just another singer. He was someone who poured pieces of his soul into every note. Even during his early school years, his voice carried a certain purity that was rare. Teachers, classmates, and church members quickly realized that Jonathan was different. When he began to rise professionally, the uniqueness of his gift became even more obvious. He was not just creating songs, he was telling a story with his voice. Throughout this journey, one figure remained constant, his mother. She was always there, standing quietly behind him, supporting him in every way possible. At award shows, church gatherings, or live concerts, her presence was felt, but never loud. She clapped the loudest, she prayed the hardest, but she never stepped into the spotlight. This quiet loyalty made people admire her, but at the same time, it made them wonder. Whenever journalists or fans tried to ask about Jonathan's childhood or the struggles he may have faced growing up, his mother would smile gently and give the safest answer possible. She would talk about prayer, faith, and gratitude, but she never spoke about the details. No matter how many times the question came, her response remained the same. And over time, this silence began to look like a wall, hiding something that the world was not meant to see. What surprised people even more was that Jonathan never pushed past that silence either. In his interviews, he often spoke about his mother with deep respect, calling her strong, faithful, and loving. But whenever the questions came close to touching their personal life, he would carefully change the subject. It was as though both mother and son had a silent agreement. Some truths were better left unspoken. This left fans and the gospel community both curious and confused. Normally, parents of successful artists are eager to share stories of sacrifice and hardship, but Jonathan's mother seemed to guard those memories like a secret, and the more she refused to speak, the more people became convinced that there was something important being hidden. People started connecting the dots between his mother's silence and the emotions in Jonathan's music. His songs were often filled with themes of pain, endurance, and faith in the middle of storms. Listeners began to feel that these weren't just poetic expressions, but reflections of something real. It felt like Jonathan had lived through something difficult, something that both he and his mother were unwilling to reveal to the public. The mystery of Jonathan's life became even more evident when people paid close attention to his music. His songs were not just melodies to be enjoyed. They carried emotions that went far beyond the surface. Every lyric, every note seemed soaked in real-life experiences. There was a weight in his voice, a sense of honesty that only comes from living through moments of struggle. Fans often said that listening to Jonathan was not just entertainment. It was healing, it was testimony, it was someone sharing their soul through sound. But with this beauty came curiosity. Listeners could not help but ask themselves, what pain is he singing about? Where does this depth come from? Some artists can create powerful lyrics through imagination, but with Jonathan, it felt different. It felt personal. His music sounded like confessions, like chapters from a book of life that he never openly read out loud, but only whispered through his art. Songs about faith holding on through storms, about hope when everything else seemed broken, about sacrifice and patience. All of these themes made fans believe there was a deeper truth behind his words. The way Jonathan delivered these psalms was too raw, too real to be fiction. It was as though his music was the only safe space where he allowed small glimpses of his hidden story to be seen. The industry noticed it too. Producers, fellow singers, and even church leaders would comment on how Jonathan's songs carried a spiritual depth that could only come from personal battles. Many admired him for being able to turn private pain into public inspiration, but at the same time, the silence about his past made people restless. Everyone felt they were only hearing half the story, through the lyrics, through the emotions, but never through clear words. For years, Jonathan's mother had kept her silence. She watched her son rise to fame, watched the world fall in love with his music, and quietly carried the weight of the past in her heart. But recently, something shifted. In a heartfelt conversation during a church event, she finally allowed herself to speak openly about what so many had long suspected. Her voice trembled at first, not from weakness, but from the heaviness of holding back for so long. She admitted that behind Jonathan's gift, behind his incredible strength, there were chapters of struggle that the world had never been told. She explained that Jonathan's upbringing had not been as easy as many assumed. There were seasons of financial hardship, moments when the future felt uncertain, and battles that tested their faith to the very core. She spoke about nights when Jonathan would sit quietly, trying to process emotions far bigger than his age. She remembered how he turned to music as a way to express feelings he could not put into words. His songs, she revealed, were not just creative expressions. They were born from survival, from the need to find light in the middle of darkness. His lyrics about storms, faith, and endurance were not metaphors. They were reflections of real struggles he lived through. What touched the audience the most was the way she described Jonathan's faith during those times. Even as a child, he leaned on prayer and music to carry him through. She admitted that she had tried to protect him from the world, but it was Jonathan himself who transformed pain into purpose. For her, keeping silent all these years was not about shame. It was about giving her son the freedom to tell the story in his own way. And yet, she confessed, she could no longer ignore the weight of people's curiosity. With tears in her eyes, she confirmed that the emotions fans had always felt in his psalms were indeed real. The struggles were real. The sacrifices were real. Jonathan had carried battles in silence, and his music had been the only safe outlet where he could release them. It was in that moment that everything clicked. The mother's silence finally broke, and the world was given the confirmation it had been waiting for. When Jonathan's mother finally spoke, it was as though years of mystery suddenly became clear. The quiet suspicions that fans had carried in their hearts were no longer just guesses, they were truth. For so long, listeners believed that his music held pieces of real pain and real sacrifice. Now, his mother's words confirmed it all. She explained that Jonathan's ability to sing with such depth came from living through seasons that tested both of them. His faith was not simply inherited, it was forged through nights of uncertainty, through battles no one outside their home ever saw. Every lyric about trusting God in the middle of storms, those were not written to sound poetic. They were written because that was exactly what he had lived. The confirmation brought a wave of emotions to everyone who had followed his journey. Fans who once said, "There's something in his voice that feels too real to be made up," now realized they had been right all along. Jonathan's music was not just gospel, it was testimony. It was survival wrapped in melody. His mother's honesty gave meaning to every song people had held close to their hearts for years. She did not reveal every detail, and she didn't need to. What mattered was that she acknowledged what people always suspected, that behind Jonathan's gift was a story of endurance, faith, and resilience. The silence was finally broken, not with drama or scandal, but with truth, and that truth only deepened the respect people had for Jonathan as an artist and as a man of faith. In that moment, Jonathan's journey became more than just the story of a singer. It became a living example of how hidden struggles can produce the most powerful testimonies. Fans now understood that they were not just listening to music, they were listening to the echo. The moment Jonathan's mother confirmed the truth, the reaction was immediate and powerful. Fans who had followed his journey for years felt a deep sense of connection, almost as if their own feelings had finally been validated. Many took to social media, writing heartfelt messages about how they always knew Jonathan's music carried something real, something born out of lived experiences. Now, with his mother's words, that belief was no longer just intuition. It was fact. Messages began flooding the internet. People spoke about how Jonathan's songs had carried them through their own storms, how his voice had comforted them during nights of loneliness, and how his lyrics about faith had given them strength when they felt weak. To know now that these songs came from his personal struggles only made his art more powerful. It was no longer just music, it was shared survival. Fans began to say that Jonathan's story was also their story, that his pain had been transformed into their healing. The gospel industry also responded with admiration and respect. Fellow artists who had sung alongside him expressed that they had always sensed something unique in his ministry. Producers and church leaders publicly honored Jonathan for being able to turn personal hardship into inspiration for millions. For them, the confirmation did not diminish his image, it elevated it. It showed that his success was not built on an easy road, but on a journey of faith that made his accomplishments even more meaningful. Even those outside the gospel community could not ignore the story. Many saw Jonathan as a reminder that greatness often rises from brokenness, and that sometimes the most beautiful voices are born out of the hardest struggles. His mother's honesty not only explained the depth of his music, it also made people appreciate the courage it takes to be vulnerable, even indirectly through song. In the end, the reaction was not just about curiosity being satisfied. It was about people recognizing the strength behind Jonathan's testimony. Instead of seeing him only as an artist, they now saw him as a living example of resilience and faith. The world had suspected, but now the world understood. When the silence finally broke and the truth was revealed, Jonathan McReynolds' journey took on a new light. He was no longer just seen as a gifted gospel singer with a beautiful voice. He became a symbol of strength, resilience, and faith in the face of life's hardest trials. The confirmation from his mother proved that behind every lyric, every heartfelt performance, and every note of passion, there was a story deeply rooted in sacrifice and survival. This revelation did not change the way people loved his music, it deepened it. Fans began listening to his songs with new ears. Lyrics that once felt poetic now felt personal. Verses about storms, endurance, and faith no longer sounded like general encouragement. They sounded like lived testimony. His music became more than entertainment. It became a bridge between his story and the lives of those who listened, inspiring people to hold on to hope no matter what battles they faced. What stood out most was how Jonathan had handled it all. Despite carrying these struggles, he never turned them into scandal or pity. Instead, he transformed pain into purpose, giving people a reason to believe that even in brokenness, beauty can be born. His mother's courage to finally speak confirmed what everyone had suspected, but it also showed the depth of their bond. Together, they had carried a truth quietly, and together, they finally allowed the world to see just enough of it to understand. In the end, Jonathan's legacy is not only about his music, but about the testimony behind it. His story is a reminder that the strongest voices often rise